Author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
President Biden has the anti-Midas touch when it comes to both supporting and getting support from his fellow Democrats. No one wants him by their side. Could that be because of the open border crisis, gas prices, inflation skyrocketing, the cost of living? Well, pick your poison. But he really does seem to be presidente non grata across much of the American political landscape. And we're going to find out why. Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Now, we have a packed show for you today, talking midterm endorsements and Biden's unpopularity, congressional hearings on UFOs, fentanyl at the open borders, and a whole lot more. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Amarillo, Texas on KGNC 710 AM and 97.5 FM. Many thanks. Thank you for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Primary season is indeed well underway, and with it, that all-important currency is being circulated, endorsements. But it seems so only for one side of the political divide. Now, has Joe Biden become presidente non grata in Democrat circles? We're fortunate to be joined by Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner, to answer that question. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Why does no one want the Joe Biden endorsement?
Let me count the ways. Inflation, soaring food prices, soaring energy prices, a crisis at the border, a on and off disinformation board to shut down free speech, border crisis, Afghanistan. Do you need any more?
Well, you mentioned border crisis twice, but it's a crisis so big they named it twice.
Well, and I think the reason I did, Mark, is because that's the one that's going to get even worse with Title 42. They don't have any idea how to handle the deluge that's inevitable once Title 42 is removed. But look, it's the stench of failure that is just surrounding this president, even more than any individual issue. It's the overall sense of no leadership, no direction, lurching from crisis to crisis, and being unprepared. It's like every crisis catches them by surprise. So it's what I call the day late, dollar short presidency, or too little, too late presidency. They always react once it seems that the media has identified the problem. So as a result, Donald Trump is being overwhelmed with requests for endorsements. And Joe Biden, nobody wants to be seen with him, associated with him. In fact, Mark, one of the two endorsements that he's issued, grand total of 2 endorsements from the sitting president, is for a congressman in Oregon who looks like he's going to lose because the party in Oregon said, we don't want your endorsement, we want the other guy. So the progressive is looking to gain strength, and it looks like at least one of the 2 guys that Biden has endorsed is going to lose. So it's a hopeless.
Well, you know, if we're basing this on Elizabeth Warren mathematics, then that will be Biden, the majority of Biden's endorsements won. Now, I mean, you mentioned Donald Trump there, and it really does. It seems that the lack of people wanting Biden's endorsements, and of course Biden himself not being freewheeling with them, that's in direct opposition to what Donald Trump's doing. Now, as we've seen in the majority, I guess, of the GOP primary races so far that Donald Trump has endorsed candidates in, that appears to be pure gold. I mean, it's not as though anybody's been, there have been a couple of losses, but it's hardly that these people have been trashed entirely. And it seems a bold move to cast out your endorsements, especially when the Fourth Estate is trying to make every single race a referendum on Donald Trump's power. So why does Trump continue to do it?
Trump has made a total of almost 75 endorsements, and he may do more. because, of course, we've got more primaries and then, of course, the general election coming up in November. Those endorsements are great for the candidates that get them. J.D. Vance in Ohio, who definitely did win because of it. So those endorsements are gold. But the key point here, Mark, is that even the candidates that don't get the Trump endorsement are promoting the America First agenda. So in other words, everybody wants the Trump endorsement. And even if they don't get it, they're arguing amongst themselves about who's the best person to carry forward the Trump legacy, the Trump mantle. So even when Trump himself doesn't pick the winning candidate, which he mostly has done, Trumpism is still at the center of every Republican primary.
Absolutely right. A good example of that is also in the Pennsylvania race, Kathy Barnett, who Trump did give her some kind words, but said that he didn't think that she was the candidate for this race at this time. But she ran as an America First candidate, espousing the same things that Donald Trump talks about, the same thing that the America First movement gets behind. And she went from, I believe it was polling in from around 6 to 8%, and she's finished at around 24, 25%. Right. That's huge. And that really shows you that between a Trump-endorsed candidate and a candidate who is openly loud and proud America First, that's over 55% of the GOP vote already sewn up for Trumpism or America First. And you really did steal the thunder from my next question by going down that rabbit hole, Tim. So it does seem pretty clear that if Trump wants it, he will get the 2024 nomination, right? And this casting out of endorsements, is it perhaps a way of ensuring that if he does run and he does win, that the people who are there in both houses are ready to work with him and for him? Does that analysis make sense?
Well, it's these endorsements, though, Mark, are a double-edged sword, because every time you endorse one person, you don't endorse others. So there's a potential for bitterness and divisiveness. But at the same time, what Trump is doing is not necessarily endorsing the candidates who are the most America First. He's endorsing the ones that he thinks can win. And that's something of an advancement of his agenda. For example, in Ohio, Josh Mandel, the state treasurer, was the most faithful to the MAGA agenda. He ran on it. He talked about how this was the centerpiece of his campaign. Dr. J.D. Vance had in the past criticized Trump, and yet Trump endorsed Vance because he thinks he has a better chance to win. But it left Mandel and his followers thinking, hey, we were loyal to you, Donald Trump, but you weren't to us. So it gets a little dicey. And then there's the issue of the Georgia endorsement, which is clearly a revenge endorsement for Trump.
Oh, yeah. Or for fans of Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm, it's a spite endorsement.
It's a spite endorsement. and okay, that happens in politics. But the problem is that David Perdue, the man that Trump has endorsed to try and take down the sitting governor, Brian Kemp, in the Republican primary, is that Perdue is trailing by more than 30 points in the latest poll. Kemp is a popular governor, Trump's attacks on him notwithstanding. So he's going to be made to look bad in Georgia. The question is, will he look that much better everywhere else?
Well, that brings us on to the question that I'm sure everybody wants your analysis on here, Tim. How big of a slaughter is it going to be come November 2022?
Well, I think it's going to be something along the lines of 2010, when the Republicans picked up 63 or 64 seats. I think it would actually be worse, Mark, but for gerrymandering. Gerrymandering has sort of secured districts for both parties, like primarily minority districts that always vote Democratic, rural districts that always vote Republican. So gerrymandering will keep the slaughter to, I wouldn't say a dull roar, but it will keep it below 100. We're talking more than 50 seats. And in the Senate, it's hard to see how the Democrats survive controlling the Senate, even though the Republicans are defending twice as many seats as the Democrats. But nevertheless, the political environment is so poisonous, Republicans are poised to pounce.
Tim Donner, thank you ever so much.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Further down the line, we talk free speech assault in New York State. But up next, after this short break, we discuss Congress and the UFO disclosure. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With Congress taking up the topic of UFOs, or unidentified aerial phenomenon as they're now known, the world is abuzz with talk of disclosure. But what does it mean from a political and military standpoint? Well, we're fortunate to be joined by the former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller, Dave Patterson, to figure that out. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thank you, Mark. Always glad to be on your program.
Great. So let's start by looking at what this is and what this isn't more specifically. Now, to the best of my discerning, it's the hearings that they held in Congress were to figure out precisely what these objects are and whether they present a threat. And that could mean, for example, foreign technology that the US doesn't have or isn't aware of. Now, is that about right?
I think that's right. I think that they've taken this pretty seriously. And I think that's a good thing. And they've kind of stayed within their lane with regard to special access airways and so forth. And I think that their main concern is that we will be surprised with adversarial technology that we had not anticipated, nor did we know was there.
Well, that's the thing. It's not even something that we don't know is there. It's what I think they used to call an unknown unknown. We don't even know that we don't know about it. So I think what they were going for was really trying to frame it as there are these objects that many military pilots, airline pilots, things have seen and recorded, but then people don't know what they are. And we're talking people high up in the Defense Department, and they don't really know what these things are. Now, how does that impact the threat assessment mindset?
Well, I thought it was kind of interesting that they would take the Unknown Unknowns, which was the title of former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld's book.
Exactly.
But it's true. I mean, there are things that we simply don't know what they are and don't know why they're there or what makes up their capability. And again, I think that the most important thing is that we're looking at this from a national security perspective. And a lot of what takes place that people see, I think, can be chalked up to particular censor artifacts. I thought that was particularly well explained when they showed the shimmering green triangle and explained that that was in fact a drone. And what made it look somewhat eerie was the fact that it was being photographed through night vision optics, which tends to do that. But at the same time, they did not dismiss things that they could not explain.
Well, I think that's always the sensible way to do it, because you do end up with, I think our audience knows well that I'm not adverse to the odd conspiracy or two, but I think if you don't put out if you don't say you don't know when you literally don't know, I think that just leads to more unfounded conspiracies. Now, there have been a number of sightings of objects, of movements, of data measurements that can't be explained over the years. And these are coming from, a lot of them are coming from professional Air Force pilots, the Navy, places like this. But they're coming out more now, aren't they? Because the attitude towards reporting has changed. Can you tell us a little about that?
I think that was one of the key aspects of this hearing, was that Chairman Carson wanted to make sure that the stigma that was previously attached to these kinds of reporting was going to be eliminated. And to his credit, Secretary Moultrie explained that they were going to do that by means of having a clear, well-defined standard process for reporting these kinds of incidents, which would give people greater comfort in coming forward. It would also be, very importantly, a mission priority. So the hierarchy has to pay attention as well.
Why is this the first set of hearings that we've had in I guess it's 50 years?
Yeah, there was a hearing back in the 60s where then Congressman Gerald Ford was the chairman. And he was a little bit miffed by the Air Force's flippant attitude, as he put it, toward these sightings. But it actually didn't go anywhere because there was no follow-up.
Yeah, of course, that doesn't mean that things weren't happening within government. As we found out, there was Harry Reid was overseeing a project that finished in 2012 that was to do with recording and evaluating. Is that about right?
He tried. I mean, he was interested in it, but I don't think that he did not present it in a way that was thoughtful and
deliberative
and compelling.
Okay. Now, there's always a political angle to talk of UFOs or UAPs. Now, in most election cycles, candidates they say that when they're in power, they're going to go for what's termed in the UFO community as full disclosure. Now, I have a couple of questions on this. First is, if there was something to talk about, could they actually talk about it? That's question one. When they become president, like for example, is the data under? If it existed, would it be under too many levels of secrecy or classification? And second, is it possible that there actually isn't anything to release to the public?
Well, I think that President Trump was quite open and forthright about his views on all of this. But here is the problem. As soon as you start to get into any level of detail, accuracy, or and granularity, suddenly you've revealed your sources, methods, your technical capability. And those are the things that we need to keep quite classified. And so it's a fine line, Mark, that you have to walk when you talk about these things. I thought that during the hearing that they were quite open and came very close to being transparent. And in fact, Moultrie said that was going to be one of their chief goals, is to provide the American public as much transparency as possible while not revealing sources and methods.
Yeah, transparency is always the watchword. Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Before we leave, I'd like to leave you with these very important words. Klaatu, Barada, Nikto. Mark, always glad to be with you. Have a great day.
Cheers. You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the country on the Radio America Network. I'd like to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Andrews, Texas on KACT 910 AM. We appreciate you. Now don't go anywhere. Later in the show, we discuss Governor Hochul's attack on the First Amendment. But up next, why is Joe Biden ignoring 100,000 deaths per year? We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Fentanyl deaths hit a record high again. Drug deaths are a seemingly unsurmountable issue that gets a mere fraction of the attention given to gun deaths. So why are the political class so keen to shine the light on one, but not on the other, far bigger problem? Well, we're fortunate to have with us today author, columnist, all-round fantastic person, and producer of Liberty Nation's C5, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for coming in, Sarah.
Wow, with an intro like that, how could I decline?
That's how we drag our guests in. We give them great intros. Now, Sarah, what are the latest?
We're hooked. Okay,
they're
hooked.
in. They can't make them an intro they can't refuse. Sarah, what are the latest figures on fentanyl deaths?
I just wrote a piece on this, and like the latest numbers coming out from 2021. It's pretty bad. It's 107,000 opioid fentanyl induced overdose deaths. That doesn't include hospitalizations. It doesn't include drying people out. It doesn't include the mental problems that creates when a person does have an overdose. I mean, sometimes it's a life lifetime of care if they do live through it. To put that into perspective, by the time you and I are done talking here, somebody will have OD'd and died within 5 minutes. It's about every 5 minutes somebody ODs and dies with drugs laced with fentanyl in the United States. So when we're done here, say a little prayer and move on. It's really bad right now.
Sarah, fentanyl, it's not a drug in itself. It's something that's put into other drugs that people are buying. So it's present in cocaine, methamphetamine, or all these different drugs that people think that they're getting what they're used to getting. But now they're getting something with fentanyl. Now, what's the purpose of putting fentanyl into these drugs?
Well, if you look at what fentanyl was created for, it's a cancer pain management drug. So it's severe, debilitating pain it was created for. It is 80 to 100 times more potent than morphine. So you have a drug that is very cheap to manufacture. They can cut it into the drugs that they want to sell, like meth, like cocaine, like heroin. They cut it into that. And then you have an extremely addictive drug, which makes them want to buy more and more and more.
All right. So all this fentanyl, it's coming across the border, then being processed into the drugs, presumably in the United States, though I presume some of that happens in Mexico too. And the fentanyl's coming initially, the majority of it, from China and then through the porous border. Now,
yes.
Here's my question. If the southern U.S. border were shut down to all illegal entry, a trafficking of all kinds, whether that's goods, people, anything, how much of a difference would it make in terms of lost lives?
Oh, it'd be an immediate difference. If you look at when we had the border closed from Title 42 under Trump, that the Biden administration sort of continued in the process of getting rid of that any day now. You had a lot less problem. If you look at just the straight numbers after the border was reopened, after people started letting people coming back through and commerce began in earnest again, Border Patrol seized 639 pounds of fentanyl-laced drugs. That's what they seized.
Now, I know what that is, but maybe some of our listeners don't understand what 639 pounds, what the lethal capability of that weight is.
That's what they caught. You know the old adage, if you see one mouse, he's got a family of 400 living behind your other wall. So this is what they have stopped. It is beyond a deadly amount of drugs.
I mean,
and people don't understand
that much fentanyl is enough to lay waste, to kill a whole big size city of people.
Yes. Yeah, you can take out Seattle, basically. Yeah. The other problem, I mean, if you look at it, if you compare March 2021 to March 2020, there was only 245 pounds seized. So it's ramped up that much. That's a 233% increase in just a year, and it's not going the other direction.
Now, I want to stick with the same topic, but move off on a slight tangent, if I may. This last week, we saw Joe and Jill Biden lamenting the very tragic murders of 10 people in Buffalo, and according to Joe Biden and his press folk, he's ready to move hell and earth to stop it happening. These murders happen, these gun murders happening. Yet I think for most people, a death by ingesting a drug that wasn't supposed to be in the drug that they wanted to take, it's still a murder in terms of whether that's a correct legal take or not. Slipping something in that's likely to kill you, I can't really see the moral difference between the two things not being both murders. So why is Biden so willing to act on one, ready to put the full force of the federal government into effect to stop one, but not the other that claims 5 times more souls per year?
Because in order to do that, he would have to, basically shut down the border or complete the wall or make sure the barriers are up and funnel people through the way it's always been designed that people come into this country. It's just not you can't just open the door and let everybody in. And he refuses to do that because he's got progressive people hammering him instead of doing what he needs to do, which is really tamp down what's going on the southern border. He prefers instead to work on, let's prohibit, let's add to the aiding and the abetting by more programs. We need to do more programs to keep people who are doing drugs into rehab centers. And, we need to teach them not to do that. And, that's addicts are addicts. They're going to do whatever they can do to get a hold of whatever they want, whatever they're addicted to. And you're not going to have them go into a program, come out and be all cleaned up and be a good member of society. So he's throwing money and ideas at the wrong end of the problem. If you shut down the supply chain, that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
You mentioned supply chains. It's almost as though we should put Pete Buttigieg in charge of bringing it in, and then almost certainly we'd have a shortage overnight. Sarah Cowgill, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure.
And we'll be right back after this short break discussing New York Governor Kathy Hochul and her plans to usurp free speech. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to our special Talking Liberty segment. We're looking into the big case this week that impacts your liberty and your freedoms. And as ever, we have constitutional attorney and host of the most excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, Esquire, to help analyze the legal morass. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So, Scott, first story I want to talk about. New York Governor Kathy Hochul. She wants to silence, and I quote that there, silence constitutionally protected speech. What are the details here?
Well, she's used the opportunity of the Buffalo supermarket massacre to advocate for restricting people's constitutionally protected rights. Mark, it's a real profile and courage for the First Amendment. She stands second to none in protecting free speech rights, except for hate speech and other unfortunate expressions of speech, which she doesn't support. It's anytime somebody says
these are her principles, if you don't like them, she has others.
Anytime somebody says I support the First Amendment, but or something, but that they don't support them, because that's what the but means, is that they actually don't. What support for the free speech means is, and really so eloquently presented by Elon Musk recently, it's just somebody that you don't like can say something that you don't like, and that's protected. That's sort of a good modern colloquial way to refer to it. But what Hochul said was, I'll protect the First Amendment any day of the week, but you don't protect hate speech. You don't protect incendiary speech. You're not allowed to scream fire in a crowded theater. There are limitations on speech. Well, to the last point, which is popularly misunderstood, that's a double lie. And what I mean by a double lie is, firstly, she misstates what that rule said, and that rule is no longer in place. What that rule said, firstly, was that it was impermissible to falsely scream fire in a crowded theater, which is an important difference. And also, that's not the law. What the law says is that for speech to be made illegal or criminal, it has to be both call to action for immediate violence and also likely to produce that action or reaction. So that's the current legal standard, the Brandenburg test. And this meets none of it. And it's such a disappointment to see this from New York's governor.
So the governor's actually made some moves on this, Scott. What specifically is she doing?
A bunch of new gun control proposals she's made, and including changes to the red flag laws, which now require reporting, where before they were optional, and a massive surveillance infrastructure to review social media posts and also punish somehow, left unspecified, the social media outlets that allow live streaming, for instance. It's an across-the-board Orwellian move against free speech rights in New York, Mark.
I just don't see how this can work because people are making these live streams on pretty much every platform. There's a live stream capability, but they're not doing them from New York more often than not.
That's not a problem for Kathy Hochul to solve, Mark. That's a problem for Mark Zuckerberg and some nerd in the Silicon Valley to solve. Kathy Hochul's only job is to keep the people of New York safe, not to make sure that social media platforms are able to function effectively.
I think the most troubling thing about this is that Attorney General Letitia James is also full steam ahead on this idea.
Well, let's recall the important part about her is that she's a politician more so than a law enforcement officer. She proved that with the NRA fiasco, and she's doing more to prove it here now.
So quick roundup on this final one here. Is this going to be challenged, and will it be a successful challenge?
The more any formal prosecution or examination of social media, once that's in place, then the challenge will come, and fingers crossed it'll be successful.
Okay, now let's move on to one that I found really fun, because California's had some ups and downs recently in the legal world. Firstly, there was the ruling that it was unconstitutional. Was it magazine bans?
Yes.
And then more recently, this week, in fact, a California law requiring that women and minorities appear in corporate boards to specific numbers. That was struck down as well. What are the details here?
So I was just looking to see the name of the judge who it's Judge Duffy Lewis of I think the Superior Court of California has responded to a challenge that California companies or companies that are headquartered in California have a certain minimum female participation rate on their board, depending on the number of board members in total. And what the judge said was that this clearly is unconstitutional, just sex-based discrimination that's not allowed. How our constitutional framework currently exists with respect to sex-based discrimination is that it has to pass by an intermediate standard, and basically it has to be sort of an important goal that's not easy to meet by other means. And one of those goals can be remedying past discrimination, and that would be allowable. And the judge found that this bill was not at all to remedy any past discrimination or any of the other permissible reasons to discriminate on the basis of sex, but instead was just to try to generate parity. They wanted, the pushers of it wanted 50% or better, presumably participation on boards by females, and you're not allowed to use the law and discriminate on sex to achieve that.
Now, I want to dig into this a little bit because I find it fascinating that this even made it far enough that would need to be challenged as a law in court. So what if there was a company set up by women for women? Would they have to, and the board got to a certain number of participants, would they then have to take on a man?
No, Mark, that would be, you're describing an example of what in their mind would be an enlightened and forward-thinking company to have so many female voices on. Diversity only counts for the favored groups. So if you're, for instance, Caucasian or male, you're not included in the world of diversity. Diversity is generally female and generally black or brown, and then also with respect to sexual orientation, certainly trans status or gender queer in some form, blue hair, these sorts of things are what counts, not the other.
We'll be having all the Harvard graduates collect their certificates, pick up a bottle of dye, and then go and get their hair done.
Yeah. Now, let me just add, though, that this wasn't a law, based on your first comment that you were surprised that it got this far anyway in the courts. And that would be a surprise to the people who put it into law as well. Just to be clear, what we now know, Mark, is that the Attorney General himself, Padilla, and this was when Jerry Brown was governor of California when the law was passed before Newsom came in. The Attorney General himself sent a note to the governor and said, this is going to be unconstitutional if this gets challenged in court. We're not going to be able to enforce it. It's just for the lulls. It's just for dunking on these corporate boards and making them the politicians who pass these laws, sort of elevate them in the minds of the progressives who demand it, even though, Mark, it's clearly forbidden by the Constitution.
Well, let's track this a little bit further. So this came in under Jerry Brown and was a law in the state of California.
Yes.
So companies would have had to react to this, otherwise be in violation of the law as it stood then, and therefore have spent time, effort, money, and resources in either attempting to or successfully complying with that law.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And they have no recourse.
Well, they could move out of California.
But they have no recourse for the time and investment and effort that they've put in to fulfill something that's unconstitutional.
That's how our system is set up. When the government wrongs you, very often you have little to no recourse.
All right. Well, let's go to one where the government has had a bit of a slap in the face. Just for our final story, Scott.
By the way, Mark, let me just add, that's why you can't get a moving truck to take you out of California fast enough, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz out of Texas, has had a bit of a win in the Supreme Court this week. Quick rundown for us.
He did, and kudos to Mr. Cruz, because he basically saw a portion of the law that he thought was unconstitutional, and then he basically just devised a case to get to the Supreme Court, and he won. And it's just, take away your personal feelings or political feelings about Mr. Cruz, just in terms of a legal, calling your shot and then making it is pretty interesting from this lawyer. This concerned a Federal Election Commission restriction on campaigns being able to pay back loans that the candidates themselves made to the campaigns. And it was a anti-bribery statute, which is that's the stated goal of the statute. It seemed like it was, it wasn't like some anti-Republican thing or some other, mechanism by which the FEC discriminated against one side or the other, except for that it discriminated against particularly wealthy candidates who have the dough to loan their campaigns a good amount of cash. So now that restriction is over, and Cruz both won on the law and on the procedural grounds. The FEC had argued that he didn't have the legal capacity to stand and challenge the law. Many of these cases at the Supreme Court are, we argue about standing and then the actual underlying law itself. And he won on both points. So he's sitting tall this week for sure.
Yeah, Ted Cruz was actually a clerk in the Supreme Court in his younger days, I believe. So if somebody knows how the system works, it should be him.
I think he was a Rehnquist judge.
He was.
Yeah.
All right, Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much for being here. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's about it for this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. My sincere thanks go out to our guests, Tim Donner, Dave Patterson, Sarah Cowgill, and Scott Cosenza. And of course to you, the listeners. Thank you for being here with us. My parting shot for this episode I'd like to borrow from Thomas Jefferson, who said, quote, "I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them." End quote. When the government treats us as children and sees that nannyism is a surefire vote winner, something has gone deeply and terribly wrong. Freedom comes from being able to use your labors to continue your heart's pursuit of happiness. And yet the world leaders see fit to spend our tax dollars elsewhere on pet projects and ideologies, and then castigate us for not wanting to treat said leaders as our true benefactors. This is not a model for success, nor is it one that can in any way lead to more happiness nor freedom. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.